Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're reviewing for you Star Wars The Force Unleashed on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the venerable Mitch Vogel for NintendoLife.com and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. Long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, Disney had yet to purchase the Star Wars IP, and George Lucas was still somewhat involved in its ongoing success. One of the last major initiatives before the Disney purchase was Star Wars The Force Unleashed, a multimedia project that aimed to bridge the two movie trilogies that were there at the time. One of the pillars of this project was a planned line of video games that aimed to immerse players in the world of Star Wars in a way never done before, the first of which is now re-releasing for the Switch. And we're talking about it. Over a decade later, Star Wars The Force Unleashed is absolutely showing its age, but those who played it in their younger years may want to give it a revisit just for the trip down memory lane. First of all, let's go over a brief reminder of which edition of Star Wars The Force Unleashed this is, because originally there were 8 different versions. Remember the one for iOS? These all had distinct content and features to the extent that some versions were almost entirely different games. This port is an upscaled version of the entry that released on Wii, which was largely the same as the versions on PS2 and PSP, but with the addition of motion controls and an exclusive PvP local multiplayer mode. While it does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity that there wasn't an attempt to create a definitive version that would unite all the exclusive elements of each port from the PS3 and 360 generation, this is at the very least a competent port of the game you may remember from Nintendo's home console at the time. The story is set between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, and places you in the role of a Force-sensitive named Galen Marek, also known as Starkiller. That's an edgy name. Basically the Shadow the Hedgehog of the Star Wars universe. After killing Starkiller's father, Darth Vader takes on the young boy to train as a secret apprentice he intends to use to help him eventually overthrow the Emperor. Years later, Starkiller's days are spent being sent on various missions to track and kill some of the remaining Jedi that are still hiding out across the galaxy, and to solidify Darth Vader's position for when he's ready to take his shot at the Emperor. The events that transpire here ultimately end up neatly bridging episodes 3 and 4, whilst establishing some interesting origins for later subplots, although it must be said that all the events here are now officially non-canon, quote-unquote, legends, since Disney decided that it was too complicated. Gameplay takes the form of a linear hack and slasher where you travel to various worlds and cut through a whole lot of robots and aliens with your lightsaber, and more importantly, your Force powers. Your lightsaber has a variety of combo attacks you can chain together, whilst you slowly unlock a broader variety of Force powers throughout the 8 or so hour campaign. Combat is competent enough, but it doesn't really feel quite as satisfying as it should, given that it's nearly the sole focus of the campaign. You're evidently wielding a super powerful plasma sword, yet it feels like you're using little more than a wooden stick when everything from stormtroopers to Wookiees usually takes several blows to take down. It doesn't help that Starkiller's repertoire of combos and Force powers is rather lackluster, and there's a strange kind of inertia to the combat animations that just feels off. Some attacks will feel like they should send an enemy reeling, only for them to barely stumble when it connects, and some animations feel like they won't do much damage on their own, but then the enemy just pings across to the other side of the galaxy. Having that frequent mismatch between attack animations makes the combat feel weightless and floaty. And although there's a decent amount of enemy variety as you travel the galaxy, it doesn't take long before they all start to feel like damaged sponges that only exist to slow you down on your trip to the boss at the end of the level. Killing enemies nets you experience points which can be put into the upgrade system that feels rather stripped down. Various attacks and powers can be upgraded via investing points into them, and you can also swap out the crystals in your lightsaber to bump up the effectiveness of certain attacks. Given how easily most foes go down with even your base kit, the upgrades don't feel like meaningful improvements. I mean, still, it's nice to have some limited agency over Starkiller's growth, and the experience points do give you a good reason to fight the legions of foes that you could otherwise just usually run past with zero consequence, so there's that. Unfortunately, Thankfully, the game was also released at a time when many game developers thought that players would love nothing more than an action game stuffed with quick-time events, so nearly every major boss fight requires one to finish them off. None of these sequences are too difficult to hit, but if you miss any of the prompts, the boss is healed up a little bit and you have to start all over again once you get them down again. At best, these quick-time events are a mindless way to finish off a fight with a few button presses, but at worst, they're an irritating hindrance that needlessly draw out the last minute of a fight. Either way, they don't add anything positive to the experience. To top it all off, the camera is often fighting you as much as your foes are. If Starkiller gets blasted back by a powerful attack, the camera has this weird tendency to instantly snap behind him, which often obscures the foe that just hit you, meaning it's harder to then take them down. Sometimes it gets stuck behind various destructible pieces of the environment, temporarily blocking your view of the action. I mean, it's not all bad all the time, but there are enough instances where the camera is goofing around that it becomes another irritating hindrance to an already shaky combat system. Another major issue is that the level design is just uninteresting, mostly sticking to a rote combination of hallways and arenas with no distinguishing mechanical characteristics. Levels are generally a matter of running into a room with a locked door, killing the requisite number of enemies to progress, and then doing the same thing in another room. There's some light platforming here or there, but nothing approaching a meaningful challenge, and puzzles are non-existent. Meanwhile, you can collect holocrons along the way that boost up your health and force powers, or even unlock concept art, but these are about as difficult to collect as picking up a penny from the pavement. The problem here is that there's not enough gameplay diversity to meaningfully differentiate levels from one another. Whether you're running down the brightly lit halls of a Star Destroyer or across the treetop bridges of Kashyyyk, it feels as though you're merely redoing the same level with different set dressing and some reskinned enemies. Most games typically find ways to thrill and impress the player throughout the campaign by an ongoing introduction of new gameplay elements or enemy types to make each level feel novel and uniquely interesting. Star Wars The Force Unleashed doesn't do this. Instead, it's content to just be a one-trick pony, a game that's as wide as the galaxy, but only an inch deep. Bashing away at foes and throwing them around with force powers is fun for an hour or so, but then you're left wondering if there's any more to the experience, and sorry, there isn't. In terms of its graphics and sound, it's okay. Some of the environments have solid atmosphere, such as the mushroom-laden surface of Felucia, but it's abundantly clear that this is a game which was originally released on substantially weaker hardware. The solid frame rate, reflective surfaces, and high resolution showcase that this is running on modern hardware, but the muddy textures, cheap animations, and empty-faced character models have aged really quite poorly. Luckily though, the soundtrack has aged well, and this is one packed with all kinds of stirring tracks that sound as though they'd been pulled right from the films. It also needs to be said that there's not really a whole lot of meat to Star Wars The Force Unleashed. You can beat the campaign in a little under 10 hours and maybe add 3 or more if you go back and collect everything. I mean, there's always the exclusive duel mode to help pad this out, but it amounts to a relatively simplistic battle mode where you and a friend pick characters and then see who can spam Force Lightning more. Low replayability in short campaigns aren't necessarily a negative if the core experience is well-paced and consistently high quality, but neither of those things describe this game. Ultimately, Star Wars games have come a long way since The Force Unleashed, with the excellent LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga being the most recent on Switch. Whilst there's some limited fun to be had here, anyone who's played a more modern interpretation of lightsaber combat, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order being the prime example, will likely have a tough time going back to 2008. Is Star Wars The Force Unleashed worth picking up? Potentially. What we have here is a shallow, short, and rather mediocre action game that's relying awfully hard on nostalgia and the popularity of the Star Wars IP in order to draw in a player base. Based solely on its own merits, there's little here that's really worth your time. Simplistic level designs, weak combat, frequent quick-time events, and low replay value makes this one hard to recommend. It's got a decent story and soundtrack, but neither of these things are good enough to outweigh the negatives. If you're just looking for another Star Wars game to add to your collection, this certainly fits the bill. If you're looking for a high-quality hack and slash, it doesn't. Star Wars The Force Unleashed is simply a passable game. Not one that we'd actively avoid, but you're not missing out on much if you choose to skip it. You've reached the end of the review. That means it's time for Alex's personal thoughts, and yeah, I'd never actually played the original back in the day. I had a friend who had it, and maybe I played like 5 minutes of it, I don't know, on the 360, I think. But yeah, this when I first booted up the game and I was playing as Darth Vader, I was actually having a good laugh. I mean, it felt a little bit sort of slow and maybe a little bit clunky, but I thought, you know, I'm playing as Darth Vader. He's very slow and methodical and powerhousey. That makes sense. And then I got hold of Starkiller and it's like, hey, oh, you know, a little bit more mobile, but not that much more. I mean, he can double jump. He's got that going for him. The combat system seems to want to rely on combos and things like that more than it has. I mean, all the combos feel a little bit arbitrary. It's like, YYA and you will infuse your lightsaber with the power of Force Lightning. And it's just an area of effect attack. And it's like, okay, but it just doesn't feel natural, and sometimes I swear the combos just didn't work. Maybe I was doing them wrong. I don't know. I felt like I was doing them correctly. I was generally having fun and enjoying myself until I got to, I can't remember which mission it was, but it's one that you'll probably be seeing because I stopped playing it halfway through so that I could capture some of it because I hadn't captured any by that point. And I was facing off against these junk golems, I think they were called, and it was just so unsatisfying to fight these things. They didn't, you know, so they took maybe too many hits, or at least it felt like it did, because, you know, sort of slash, 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 and then they would die. Or I could just like throw them and sometimes they would die. I don't know. It just felt really unsatisfying to fight them. And, you know, going back and looking at things, I didn't have an amazing time, but I didn't have a bad time either. I think a 5 is absolutely dead on. It really is just like, yeah, this is a game. It functions. There's nothing super wrong with it, but there's also nothing super right with it. It's just like, it's really just right down the middle. I don't think I'm going to be going back to this one, but if you enjoy it, then I can sort of maybe see why.